I didn't expect to wake up that morning to a message from Kash Patel. We hadn't spoken in over a year, since the Durham investigation went quiet and the usual political circus drowned out anything that resembled real accountability. But there it was, a signal message at 5:17 a.m., need to talk. Meet at 4th DNE, bring nothing. Not even your phone. I knew Kash. When he sent a message like that, you dropped everything. By the time I arrived at the corner near Union Station, the street was quiet, fog curling around the street lamps like ghosts of forgotten truths. He was waiting in a nondescript sedan, engine running. I slid into the passenger seat. He looked tired, but wired, like someone who had just found something they weren't supposed to. I need you to hear this, Kash said without looking at me. But you can't record. You can't even take notes. I nodded. What are we dealing with? He reached into the glove box and pulled out a thin brown folder, sealed with an official DOJ sticker, ripped open. He didn't hand it to me. Just opened it in his lap. This is part of a classified memorandum, unredacted. Pulled from the SCIF before it could be buried, he said quietly. It ties Obama, directly, to surveillance operations that weren't just illegal. They were personal. Vindictive. I frowned. Surveillance of who? Kash's eyes locked on mine. Of Trump. Of Flynn. Of journalists. And, get this, even of Supreme Court justices. Pretext. National security. Reality. Political leverage. The air in the car went still. You're telling me Obama authorized this? I'm telling you he ordered it. And I've got the signature chain to prove it. That's when I noticed the second folder on the dashboard. A thumb drive taped to its spine. And that, Kash said, is what makes this go nuclear. I stared at the thumb drive. It was unlabeled. Just plain black plastic, like something you'd find at any office supply store. But the way Kash was looking at it, it might as well have been radioactive. What's on it? I asked, my voice low. Raw intercepts, he replied. Audio files. Internal memos. Unfiltered comms from inside the West Wing, spanning from late 2015 through early 2017. I blinked. Wait, you're saying you have White House-level communications recorded? He nodded grimly. Yeah. NSA flagged and stored them under FISA Title I extensions, but here's the kicker, some of these were off-books. Set up through private contractors, routed through unacknowledged IC nodes. That's why nobody was supposed to ever find them. And how did you get them? I asked. Kash hesitated, then gave a half-smile. Let's just say some people inside the system aren't okay with what they saw, and they trust me more than the press. He popped the thumb drive from the folder and passed it to me. You can plug that in once you're secure. But let me warn you, the first audio clip will change everything. I held it in my hand. It was warm. Or maybe that was just my pulse pounding. I can't drop this as a leak, I told him. If this is real, if it's really Obama, authorizing surveillance on private citizens without warrants, this could shatter the entire political establishment. That's the point, he said flatly. I'm done playing games. I spent years in the system, believing justice would catch up. But it won't. Not unless we drag it into the light ourselves. He pulled away from the curb. I'm going off-grid after this. You'll know why once you hear it. Then he was gone, vanished into the fog, the tail lights blinking once before disappearing down Constitution Avenue. I was alone. Holding the spark that could set DC on fire. I didn't go home. I didn't go anywhere near Wi-Fi. I drove 2 hours out of DC, to an abandoned ranger outpost in Shenandoah I'd used before for sensitive work. No cameras. No cell signal. Just trees, wind, and a silence thick enough to trust. I pulled the thumb drive from my pocket and slid it into an offline laptop I'd prepped years ago for exactly this kind of thing. The folder was simple/intercept/POTUS_com/inside were 3.mp3 files. All time-stamped. All dated. All labeled with cold precision, int, POTUS, mtg1-121515.mp3 int, POTUS, mtg2-012016.mp3 int, POTUS, oval, 030116.mp3 I clicked the first. A burst of static, then the unmistakable voice of Barack Obama filled the room. I want the assessment done quietly. No paper trail. Keep it buried under the Brennan Group, off DNI books. We need to know what he's doing, where he's getting his funding, and who's feeding him intel. Another voice, likely John Brennan's, responded. Understood. We'll use, redacted, and backchannel through GCHQ. It won't touch FISA. Obama again, good. I don't want anything bouncing back on us before November. I paused it. My chest felt like it was caving in. He wasn't talking about a foreign adversary. I knew who he was. They were talking about Trump. In December of 2015. Before he was even the nominee. Before Crossfire Hurricane. Before the Steele dossier was even a footnote. I clicked the second file. Flynn's a problem, Obama said. Too many ties to the Russians, and he's got friends inside the agencies. I want surveillance extended, and if the court hesitates, we bury it under executive prerogative. A beat. Then, tell Susan to prepare the legal cover. If we get heat, we frame it as counterintelligence. My hands were shaking now. This wasn't political strategy. This was weaponized intelligence. Preemptive strikes on political opponents under the cloak of national security. No warrants. No oversight. Just presidential will. Then I opened the last file. This one was different. Longer. Clearer. And far more damning. Because in that one, Obama named names. Justices. Senators. Media heads. And then he said something I'll never forget. Leverage is how you govern in a post-truth environment. Don't give me process. Give me results. I closed the laptop. And realized the country I thought I lived in didn't exist. I sat in that cabin for hours. Staring at the laptop. Listening again. Rewinding. Playing certain moments on loop. Part of me hoped I'd misheard something, that context would reveal this was a training op, a simulation, anything other than what it appeared to be. But no. Every second confirmed it. The former President of the United States had directed unauthorized surveillance, weaponized intelligence agencies, and used state power to dig up leverage on political opponents, journalists, even Supreme Court justices, all under the illusion of national security. This wasn't just a scandal. It was treason by slow drip. But what was I supposed to do with it? If I went to the press, they'd bury it, if not out of fear, then out of allegiance. If I sent it to Congress, it would vanish into a classified committee and never see daylight. I wasn't naive. I'd watched too many truth bombs diffused with bureaucratic shrugs. That's when I saw the second file folder in the drive's root directory /escrow/insurance/inside, one document. Contingency_plan_kp.pdf. It was written by Kash. Dated 2 weeks ago. It was a step-by-step leak strategy. Timed releases. Blockchain validation keys. Press targeting. Dead man switches. He'd planned for this. He knew he might not be around when it broke. And he'd entrusted it to me. There was even a message at the top: if you're reading this, I'm probably already off the grid, or dead. Doesn't matter. You've seen the truth. Now make them see it, too. I leaned back in my chair, the ceiling fan spinning above me like the last seconds of a countdown. I had two choices: stay quiet, protect my life, let history bury another betrayal. Go loud, and risk everything. But as I stared out that cabin window, I knew, history only remembers the ones who didn't blink. I pulled out my satellite modem and began uploading the first audio clip to a decentralized drop server. The signal was weak, barely enough bandwidth to upload a photo, let alone a compressed audio file of a presidential recording. But I wasn't using YouTube. I wasn't stupid. Kash's plan routed the leak through a decentralized mesh of encrypted nodes, many of them in countries that didn't care much for US takedown requests. Once the file hit the first node, it would replicate. Mirror. Multiply. There'd be no undoing it. Still, as the progress bar ticked slowly, 6%. 12%, I felt a cold knot in my gut. Not fear. Not exactly. More like the recognition that once I crossed this line, there was no coming back. No job to return to. No friends I could trust. No agency I could call for help. I wasn't just leaking a file. I was starting a war. By the time the upload hit 100%, it was already over. Kash had set the trigger. Once the primary node verified upload, a countdown began, 30 minutes until full auto-distribution to whistleblower networks, 3 foreign media outlets, and a mirror on the blockchain with immutable time stamping. I checked the time, 10:43 a.m. At 11:13 a.m., the world would change. I packed up the drive, disabled the laptop, and doused the cabin's electronics with salt water. No trace. No digital fingerprints. No heat signature. Everything Kash had taught me. Then I turned on the satellite phone, just briefly. There were already 2 missed calls. Blocked numbers. Followed by a single text: "You've made a mistake." No name. No signature. Just those 4 words. I smashed the phone on the stone floor. At 11:14 a.m., it happened. It started with an anonymous post on a site used by disaffected intel analysts. Then came the mirrors on Tar. Then a Chilean paper posted a clip from the first audio file, translated, with the original English transcript attached. Then the fire caught wind. Within minutes, hashtags were trending worldwide, hashtag Obama intercepts, hashtag deep state drop, hashtag Kash bomb, and then, the first cable news alert: breaking, alleged audio of former President Obama ordering surveillance of political opponents surfaces online, authenticity under review. By noon, the White House went dark. By 12:03, the former president's spokesman issued a denial. But the full recording was already archived in 40 countries. In 6 languages. Verified by independent sound engineers. And paired with time-stamped memos Kash had quietly released weeks earlier to a foreign court. They couldn't kill it. They couldn't scrub it. And they couldn't silence what came next. By 3 p.m., D.C. was in a state of organized panic. The media scrambled to control the narrative. Every outlet tried spinning it differently: unverified leak, foreign disinformation, AI-generated deepfake, but the problem was, the evidence was bulletproof. Audio experts from Israel, Germany, and even MIT confirmed the voiceprints matched Barack Obama, John Brennan, and Susan Rice with near-perfect precision. The timestamps were consistent. The file headers were intact. There was no sign of synthetic tampering. This was real. And they knew it. The knock came at 4:22 p.m. I was already in a safe house in rural Pennsylvania by then. A cabin owned by a retired SEAL I owed a favor to. He knew not to ask questions. Just handed me a burner and a glass of bourbon. I answered on the second ring. "Kash is gone," said the voice. It was a whisper. A woman. One of his old contacts from ODNI. Disappeared 2 hours ago in Virginia. Black Suburban. No plates. No trace. I didn't speak. "There's chatter," she continued. "Langley wants containment. Not legal action. Just erase and replace. They're going to paint you as the threat next. Of course they were. The only thing more dangerous than truth is the man who dares to release it. By nightfall, protests had begun outside federal courthouses in Atlanta, Dallas, and Denver. Not violent, but massive. Tens of thousands chanting, "No more shadows. We want names. Arrest Obama." Twitter banned the hashtag #LeverageGate within the first hour. YouTube deleted every video within 90 seconds of upload. But the internet was too fast, too wild, too angry. You couldn't contain this. Not anymore. And then came the bombshell. At 10:06 p.m., Clarence Thomas issued a public statement through a private newsletter. "If any of this is true, and I have reason to believe it is, we are staring into the abyss of constitutional collapse. Surveillance of the judiciary is not just unlawful. It is an act of authoritarianism. I demand a full congressional inquiry. Immediately." The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. It was the sound of history shifting. By dawn, the balance of power had tilted, and the regime knew it. The sitting president, careful not to name his predecessor, issued a brief statement from behind the press room podium: "We urge calm. We're reviewing all materials related to these so-called disclosures. Let me be clear, any illegal surveillance of U.S. citizens or public officials, no matter who authorized it, will be investigated." It was meant to pacify. Instead, it enraged. Because the people didn't want statements. They wanted arrests. At 8:12 a.m., a sealed indictment was filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Somehow, miraculously, it leaked within 30 minutes. The charges were devastating: abuse of executive power, illegal surveillance of federal judges, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to undermine a presidential election. The initials at the top. BJO. The document wasn't signed yet, but the message was clear: someone inside DOJ had switched sides. Or was scared enough to stop covering. Meanwhile, I stayed mobile. Every hour, a new location. Burner phones. Cash-only supplies. I kept tabs on the networks Kash had built, the file mirrors, the whistleblower groups, the underground media nodes that were now operating like war correspondents. And then, around 11:47 a.m., I got a text through one of the secured back channels: "Turn on satellite channel 327. Right now." I borrowed a truck stop TV and switched it. A live press conference had just begun. Not in America. In Reykjavik, Iceland. The Prime Minister stood beside a U.S. expat known for leaking intelligence in the early 2010s. Together, they confirmed the receipt of classified internal White House memos, signed by Obama, relating to surveillance of non-American citizens for leverage over American ones. "This isn't just a U.S. scandal," she said. "It's global." And then came the final blow: "We are officially requesting the presence of Barack Obama before an international tribunal to answer questions related to covert operations conducted on Icelandic soil without our consent." A former U.S. president was now wanted for questioning by a sovereign nation. For the first time in modern history. They could spin a domestic leak. They could silence an internal whistleblower. But they couldn't stop the world from watching. And now, the entire globe was asking the same question: what else has been hidden? The gloves came off that night. Around 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, coordinated cyber attacks hit several independent media platforms that had hosted the recordings. Servers melted. DNS records vanished. Editors received legal threats, and in some cases, anonymous messages containing their home addresses. But it was already too late. The files had been downloaded millions of times. One node, run out of Jakarta, kept pinging new mirrors every hour. Another, traced to a Norwegian university, embedded the recordings into a blockchain archive disguised as financial contracts. And then there was the university in Argentina, where a rogue professor released an AI voice analysis confirming the Obama audio was 99.98% authentic. Meanwhile, the U.S. corporate media was flailing. CNN accused foreign agitators. MSNBC blamed alt-right disinformation networks. Fox toggled between cautious coverage and opportunistic outrage. But the American public wasn't buying it anymore. They didn't need pundits. They had ears. They had transcripts. And now, they had proof. By morning, a full rebellion had erupted inside the intelligence community. Mid-level analysts. Tech specialists. Even legal counsel. Whistleblowers were flooding independent journalists with emails, files, documents, some dating back over a decade. A new term trended across underground forums, Shadownet. This was the informal name insiders were giving the network of operations Obama had allegedly approved, off-the-books digital eavesdropping, black-budget psyops, judicial pressure campaigns, and media influence programs, all routed through a handful of compartmentalized units. But one file rose above the rest. A file marked, Leverage, SCOTUS//directives. It was a 17-page document that appeared to be a strategy memo, drafted by a senior advisor in 2016, detailing how surveillance data on sitting Supreme Court justices could be used to influence upcoming decisions. It didn't give orders. But it suggested tactics. And chillingly, next to Clarence Thomas's name, someone had handwritten in the margin, "Too rigid. Needs pressure." That document broke the internet. It also broke the silence. At 5:41 p.m. Justice Samuel Alito issued a rare public statement from the bench: if any branch of government seeks to weaponize surveillance tools to manipulate this court, then the republic has ceased to function as a democracy. We demand answers. Now. Within an hour, the Supreme Court called for a closed emergency session. It had never happened before. Not in wartime. Not in Watergate. Not ever. Whatever was coming next, it would change the foundation of the nation itself. June 10, 9 a.m., the marble steps of the Supreme Court were sealed off by U.S. Marshals. Media vans lined the perimeter. Armed guards flanked every entrance. No cameras were allowed inside. No clerks leaked notes. But even from the outside, you could feel the tension radiating off the columns like heat from a furnace. The justices weren't gathering to debate a case. They were meeting to decide whether their own institution had been compromised, and if the former commander-in-chief who once publicly praised the balance of power had privately dismantled it from within. Inside that chamber, according to a trusted source close to one of the law clerks, the room was silent for a full 2 minutes before Chief Justice John Roberts spoke. If these documents are legitimate, then we must act, not politically, but constitutionally. Alito reportedly fired back. You don't get to split the difference on this one, John. If the executive branch spied on this court, it's not a scandal. It's a constitutional catastrophe. Then Thomas spoke last. And what he said would become legend. You cannot intimidate a judge without rotting a nation from the inside out. We either expose this now, or there may not be a court left in 10 years. The court voted unanimously, 9-0, to authorize an unprecedented judicial inquiry into the allegations of surveillance and coercion targeting justices between 2015 and 2017. The court had never launched such an inquiry in its history. And they didn't wait for Congress to act. The announcement was made in a midday press conference led not by Roberts, but by Thomas himself. His voice was calm. Steady. But there was fire behind his words. The American judiciary is not a tool to be bent or bullied by politics. The integrity of this institution will be defended. If that means exposing crimes committed at the highest levels of power, so be it. The crowd erupted. And so did Washington. Within minutes, panic calls flooded the DNC. Former cabinet members lawyered up. Intelligence veterans disappeared overseas. One former CIA director even attempted to flee through a diplomatic backchannel, only to be detained in Heathrow. And then, like a match tossed on dry kindling, Congress fractured. Dozens of moderate senators flipped. Publicly. A bipartisan group called the Article 3 Caucus formed overnight, its sole mission, protect the judiciary and root out executive overreach. By 6 p.m., articles of inquiry were being drafted. And Barack Obama? He hadn't made a statement in 72 hours. Not a tweet. Not a post. Not a whisper. He was either preparing a defense. Or preparing to vanish. It was the evening of June 15 when Barack Obama finally emerged. Live from an undisclosed location, flanked by no advisors, no flags, no seal, he appeared on screen in a plain gray suit. The broadcast wasn't carried by any mainstream outlet. It streamed directly to the public via a secure video feed shared across thousands of independent platforms. No intro. No music. Just him. Older. Stern. And utterly composed. You've heard my voice in recordings I never intended for the public. You've read documents meant for eyes sworn to secrecy. You're angry. I understand that. But I will not apologize for protecting this country. He paused. Yes, I authorized programs. Programs designed to identify threats, foreign and domestic. Some of those operations pushed legal boundaries. Some of them crossed them. Another pause. But ask yourselves this, if I hadn't acted, if I'd let chaos fester, what kind of nation would we be living in today? He looked directly into the camera. I will not run. I will not hide. And I will not pretend. Let justice take its course. Then the feed cut. Exactly 5 minutes long. Within hours, the Justice Department issued a formal subpoena. Secret Service agents met Obama at an airfield in Maryland the next morning. No cuffs. No spectacle. Just silence. He boarded a government aircraft and was flown to a secure holding facility at an undisclosed location. No press was allowed inside the hearing. But the ruling, issued 5 days later by a federal judge, was made public. This court finds that sufficient evidence exists to proceed to trial on charges related to the unauthorized surveillance of U.S. citizens, including elected officials and members of the judiciary, in violation of multiple constitutional protections. The case was set to be heard before a special tribunal, authorized by the Supreme Court, overseen by a coalition of federal judges from multiple circuits, an extraordinary measure for an extraordinary moment. The first day of trial was scheduled for September 5. Kash Patel never resurfaced. But his final act lit a fire that no agency, no platform, no party could extinguish. The government would never be the same again. And for the first time in a generation, Americans realized something stunning: one man, armed with the truth, really could bring down a system built on lies.